Electrified. We didn't check me into the first facility we went to. It was close to midnight, so only a receptionist and an orderly were on the ward, dull-eyed and chatting at the registration desk behind a security window. The linoleum floors were grimy. The corridors were bleak. I saw a shadow dart across the dim light at the end of the hallway. "Nick, did you see that?" I whispered. "Yeah, I did. I definitely did." "This doesn't feel right to me. If it were you, would you stay here?" "Not in a million years," he said. So as the receptionist slid open the bulletproof glass and pushed a clipboard with a pen chained to it in my direction, Nick, my longtime friend and neighbor, took me gently by the elbow and without a word steered me to the exit, out to his car, and back home, where his wife would tuck me in and stay the night sleeping on my couch. A day and a half later, Nick chaperoned me to a real hospital, highly regarded and newly burnished by way of enormous donations from the city's 1%ers, whose names were etched on plaques around the lobby. A skylight rained light into the atrium. The granite floors were cool, and the marble columns gleamed as if they were polished on the hour. We walked to a large bank of silver elevators and followed our instructions to get off on the pedestrian level, then crossed the glass-paneled walkway to my ward. When we got there, we were greeted by a set of chipped metal doors, painted probably a decade ago, an industrial mint green. They were locked. Nick rang the bell on the wall next to the doors, identified us, and escorted me inside. He turned over my gallon-sized Ziploc bag of prescription meds and my weekender travel bag to the nurse, then hugged me and left me standing in the entry to the mental ward of the world-renowned hospital. I was here to be electrified. I was here, at my own insistence, to receive electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, commonly known as shock treatment. I was 19 years old when I had my first breakdown. It was 1966. I was a college freshman sitting alone on a colonial-style upholstered couch in the student center, waiting for my roommate to pick me up for dinner. It was raining, and through the windows I could see the early darkness of a northeastern autumn taking over the sky. I'd been feeling fluish and sad for a few weeks, with a tight knot in my stomach and an odd feeling of foreboding I had been struggling to ignore. Now, without so much as a minute's warning, my body seemed to lose its mass, and I was looking down at myself from above the room. My throat opened and I sucked in air, and my heart seemed to seize up. I was terrified, but paralyzed. I was dying. I was 19 years old, and I was dying. An anxiety attack. That's what I later learned to call it, the first of many. That night, I came back down to earth and went to dinner. But within a few days, my terror had morphed into a depression that lasted several weeks. I was disoriented and scared, but functional. At school, I'd become part of a community typical of those on campuses at the time. We organized political protests. We did drugs. We slept with each other, and sometimes we even went to class. We were energized with friendships that were sealed by common purpose. It was ethereal and meaningful at the same time. So during the months it took to fully regain my stability, this group of friends gave me structure and staved off my feelings of isolation. Then, a couple years in, I began to see casualties. One friend, a shaggy redhead, a National Merit Scholar from a New Jersey high school, was sitting near a hot stove in his kitchen tripping on LSD when he became convinced that he was on fire. He went into his bathroom and came out with half a beard, having shaved off the other half. He sat back down and smiled at us. One night, I accidentally set my friend Erwin's wiry hair on fire while passing a joint, and didn't know it until we saw smoke rising off the top of his head. Another afternoon, a classmate searched on campus looking for me. He had dropped acid 3 days earlier and was still tripping, and he felt there was something I could do to help him. I smoked dope like everyone else I knew, but I stayed away from psychedelics. My earlier dissociative experience was enough to make me wary of intentionally altering my brain chemistry. The summer after my junior year, I had a relapse. It was worse this time. I was terrified to be alone. When my boyfriend had to go out one night, I made him call our neighbor to come sit with me in our apartment while I tried to sleep. With the bedroom lights off, I lay curled up under the blankets with the door open just enough to see my friend sprawled out on the sofa watching TV. The shifting light and shadows from the screen played across the walls, and his face was luminous from the glow. I never closed my eyes because I dreaded the dark. The next morning, I called my mom and asked her to send my sister to pick me up and bring me home. When I walked through the door, my mother looked at me with such incomprehension and helplessness. If I could have gotten well at that moment, I would have done it just for her. I was taken to a doctor and got a prescription for what would be the first in a series of meds I would take over the next 40 years. By the time summer was over, I was still on the frail side, but ready to go back to school for my senior year. I met the challenge of getting through 2 final semesters, though I barely kept up with my classes and was far from what I would have called recovered. I was just beginning to discover the difference between recovering and healing. One definition of healing is the restoration of health, the closure of a wound. I can say that I healed after each episode. Recovery is something different. The author F. Scott Fitzgerald defined it for me when describing what he learned from his own depression. A man does not recover from such things. He becomes a different person. And eventually, the new person finds new things to care about. Wounds heal and leave scars. Recovery is embracing those scars as tokens of one's transformation. Now, we try to find reasons for things. It's human nature to ask why. I don't think about reasons anymore. The most I can say is that over time, I would be transformed in ways I can't yet define. Some months before Nick delivered me to the hospital, I had told my doctor I thought it might be a good time for me to go off my meds. I've been taking drugs for my depression and anxiety in one combination or another for too long. From my own experience, prescribing for mental illness is an art as much as a science. And after a lot of fine-tuning, my doctor and I had gotten to a good place. Normalcy had taken hold, and it had been several years since I'd had a depressive episode or even felt any significant anxiety. Maybe it was reckless, but I wanted to live at least part of my adult life unmedicated. I wanted to experience my own unadulterated strength. I was tired of shoving pills down my throat every day, and I was feeling just fine. You have to understand, this is going to take a while, and it won't be easy, he said. You're on 3 medications. We have to work with each one individually. At the same time, we manage their interactions. You'll have to pay attention to any symptoms. You'll have to be patient. This was not a capricious man. Widely known as a virtuoso in balancing pharmaceuticals with brain chemistry, he'd already walked me through 2 bad episodes. He'd given me his warnings. Now it was my choice. Let's do it, I said. I'm ready for a life. It didn't go well. It can take weeks or even months for a medication to take hold or to clear the system. Early in the process of clearing the drugs out of my system, things started to go bad. The depression I'd been free of for so long began to creep in like a snake from under a rock. Everything was crushing pain. My hair, my skin, the palms of my hands. My vision was shrouded. It felt numb behind my eyes. Everything was becoming more and more unreal. Each day I descended a little further into a deepening, consuming chasm. By sheer willpower, I got myself to work every morning, but to maintain any degree of composure, I began to call my doctor each afternoon when my tolerance for daylight had worn thin. Then I would go sit in his offices until it got dark, and I knew another day would soon end. Staff would check on me every so often and offer me animal crackers or pretzels, but by that time I couldn't swallow very well and was barely eating anyway. So I drank water and sucked on Altoid mints, waiting until the sun set and I could drive home, where I would turn off the lights, get into bed, and try to keep my eyes closed until morning. By this time, it was clear I had what is called medical-resistant depression. This meant that regardless of which and how many pills I took, the outlook for my recovery was not good. This kind of depression, not effectively treated, can lead to physical changes in certain parts of the brain and cognitive changes that are irreversible. I need to go to the hospital, I told him, and he agreed. We'd already talked about options for my treatment, from the least to the most aggressive, and I had done my research. I want electroshock therapy, I told him. I'll try to find you a bed, he said. Wait here while I make some calls. There were only 2 spots available in the entire city, one in a facility that did not offer ECT, but would be temporary until I could transfer. There was also a bed in the big hospital that might open up in a day or 2. ECT was practiced there, and the neurologist was a respected expert in the field. Spending another night without professional care seemed to me untenable. Tonight, I said. I need to go tonight. That's how I got to the first treatment center, the one with the bulletproof glass. Then, the day after Nick had shuttled me home from there, I got a call saying that a bed had indeed opened at the hospital. I was to get my things ready. That's how I found myself with a Ziploc bag full of pills, and everything I knew about my life locked either deep inside my dysfunctional psyche or outside the chipped mint green doors. How do you prepare for a stay in a mental ward? What do you pack? Did you bring makeup? A blow dryer? Vanity can sustain a surprising magnitude of assaults, and I still had just enough clarity to know this. The gray roots that had grown out in my hair were contributing to an image of myself, and it wasn't doing me any good. My Italian grandmother had a characterization she would apply to certain unkempt or agitated individuals. Rosa Pazza, which is translated as Rose the Crazy Lady. I had little dignity left at this point, but I knew I could not commit myself to a crazy house looking like a crazy lady. The dye and developer were already in my bathroom cabinet, so I mixed them, sat on the cold tile floor with a dark blue towel and a magnifying mirror, and started dabbing at my scalp. You control what you can. The mental ward in this privately funded world-class medical facility had escaped the renovation that had transformed the rest of the hospital. Institutional plastic chairs lined the walls in the common room, and an orange vinyl sofa was pushed against a column in the center of the room. There was no marble and no atrium. The floors were scuffed linoleum tiles. The patient's room were dim but pristine. Beds were covered with clean white sheets and thin cotton blankets. The walls were blank, with no decoration at all except for mirrors, which were actually squares of polished metal screwed to the walls in the bathrooms. I assume the bedroom setup was intended to disincentivize a patient's inclination to linger in seclusion. I did bring makeup and a blow dryer, for all the good it did. It was impossible to see in the mirrors, and a nurse had confiscated my hairdryer along with almost everything else at intake. Hygiene was encouraged, but the shower stalls were approximately the size of small milk cartons, with spray heads that drooled like baby teething, and that had to be restarted with a push button every 30 seconds. The staff adhered to a routine. The day started with breakfast. Then patients scheduled for their ECT were dressed in hospital gowns and prepped for their treatments. Those who weren't scheduled for a treatment or who were not ECT patients sat in the common room and watched the frightened and resigned be escorted one at a time into the elevator on wheelchairs, then later brought back to the ward, still under anesthesia, on hospital beds. For the rest of us, mid-morning meant group therapy sessions, 1 hour. Then an hour of individual therapy, followed by free time on the plastic chairs in front of a TV playing soap operas or game shows until lunch. After lunch, what was loosely termed occupational therapy. There was room for this at the end of the corridor with swinging doors that had to be unlocked. Here's what was there. Brown-edged children's coloring books, boxes of broken crayons, outdated magazines with pages torn out, stubby yellow pencils with no erasers, tattered crossword puzzle books with half-filled grids on every page, like that. At dinner, we were given a menu that allowed us to select our individual preferences for the following day's meals. An activity meant to give us a sense of control, I suppose. After dinner, we could stand naked under the dribbling shower head, then to bed. We might have read, but there was no lamp. I was so thankful that I had touched up my roots. Even though I couldn't see my reflection in the metal mirror, I was able to sustain the notion that I was, in fact, not Rose at all, but a marginally presentable, if temporarily unhinged woman with good hair and limited entertainment. The idea of letting someone attach what is essentially a large battery to one's head is incomprehensible to a lot of people who reckon that in this case the cure is worse than the disease. Without experiencing the devastation of depression, there's no way anyone can imagine a sufferer's agony. It's like the husband who stands beside his wife while she's delivering a baby and afterwards believes he's experienced childbirth. In their advertisements, drug companies would have us believe that the symptoms of depression are sadness, loss of interest, fatigue. To anyone who's gone through a real depression, that's just a bad day. And the severity of any given episode can range in its intensity and symptoms from person to person, from incident to incident. I'd been seasoned, and I thought well armed by my previous episodes, but when consciousness itself is a torment, any potential solution, regardless of how extreme, seems a reasonable choice. I don't think any one of my family or friends thought it was a good idea, but they had witnessed my disintegration, and they knew nothing else was making the least bit of difference. So they became my surrogates and my caretakers through what even I knew was a risky business. Several came to visit every day. I assigned power of attorney to one. A few became a network of communication with other friends and family. I remember little of it. There are memory problems associated with ECT. The immediate short-term memory loss is explained to patients before they begin treatment, but which I don't remember because of the immediate short-term memory loss. This can be one of the most frightening parts of ECT. Waking up from my first few treatments was a horror. I had no idea what this place was or why I was here. I didn't recognize anyone. I thought my doctors were characters I'd seen on TV. I spent days demanding to be released and sent home. I was furious. Even now, most of those 3 weeks are a blank. I do remember my priest coming to see me, a young, red-haired, freckle-faced convert to Greek Orthodoxy, carrying a black box resembling a large cosmetic case, which was lined in scarlet velvet and held scented oils and sacred things. I say he came every day, but I say that only because that's what it felt like to me, not because I know it for a fact. The staff would allow us privacy in a cramped office off the day room, with just enough space for a desk and 2 wooden chairs. I remember him kissing his purple stole and draping it around his shoulders and giving me communion. He prayed and cupped his hand on my head. I cried because he was unambiguous and kind, and the touch of his hand was the only thing that made sense to me. He brought grace with him into that tiny room, and grace was the last resource I had left. Later, I came upon a verse from Hebrews 11, verse 1, that articulated the conviction that had sustained me. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. In his book, The Crack-Up, which documents his own breakdown, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "In the real dark night of the soul, it is always 3 o'clock in the morning." Somehow, in the throes of my own anguish, I knew that all I had to do was put one foot in front of the other and wait until dawn. I clung to my belief in the morning. I've related to Fitzgerald's struggle for hope and stability for most of my life, but I also remember what his friend and rival Ernest Hemingway wrote: "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places." Morning comes. We inspect our scars, take faith in the reinforced structure of our remodeled fractures, and go about our day. Thank you.